In the 17th century era, one man defined, or I'd say, redefined what it meant to be king. He ruled for 72 years, which is the longest reign of any monarch. He built the most extravagant palace the world had ever seen. He made himself a living symbol, called himself the Sun King, Le Roi Soleil, and he made himself center of France's universe. And his name, Louis XIV. Louis XIV was born in 1638 after 23 years of childless marriage between his father, Louis XIII, and Anne d'Autriche. Now, just a little background to understand the circumstances that led to the birth of Louis XIV. Now, Louis XIII got married to Anne of Austria at the age of 14. They were both in their 14s, although they got engaged much earlier at 11. Now, after marriage, it took them 23 years to have their first son. Anne d'Autriche unfortunately had several miscarriages, and that was why at birth they named him Dieudonné, which means a gift from God, because they believed he was a miracle child. Now, Louis XIV became king in 1643 when he was just 4.5, almost 5 years old. Obviously, he was too young to rule at age 4, 5. So France was run by his mother, Anne d'Autriche, and Cardinal Mazarin. Now, Cardinal Mazarin was the chief minister, something like the prime minister. He managed the day-to-day activities of the government and all. And then came the Fronde. The Fronde was a civil war, was a series of violent civil wars between 1648 and 1653, where nobles and Parisians rose up against the royal authority. Now, in 1661, the chief minister, Cardinal Mazarin, he died. And Louis XIV was around 22 or 23 years at the time, and everyone expected him to name a new chief minister, a new prime minister to replace Mazarin. But to the shock of everyone, to the shock of the kingdom, he refused to name a chief minister. He intended to govern alone. And this began his absolute monarchy, where he ruled by divine right and centralized all power in himself. Louis XIV adopted the sun as his personal symbol. He was at the center and everything else revolved around him. That's why he's called Le Roi Soleil. He was not just a king, he was the state in itself. Now, in those days, one of the passions of the kings of France at the time was hunting. In fact, Philippe IV le Bel actually died while hunting in 1314 in the forest of Fontainebleau. So Louis XIV was fond of going hunting outside Paris in Versailles. He transformed it into the Palace of Versailles starting in 1661. Now, there were two main reasons why he decided to build the Chateau de Versailles in Versailles and not in Paris. One was because of the war La Fronde. Remember the war? He wanted to move away from Paris, far away from Paris, because they were hostile to him during the Fronde, the wars. Another reason why he wanted to build the Chateau de Versailles was because there was a chateau built, there was a castle built by his then Minister of Finance, the Superintendent of Finance called Nicolas Fouquet. He built his own chateau called Chateau de Vaux-le-Vicomte. Louis XIV wanted to build even a bigger, more beautiful, more luxurious castle than Superintendent of Finance, Nicolas Fouquet. So he decided to use the same architect that built the Chateau de Vaux-le-Vicomte, okay, at the Chateau de Versailles, notably Le Vaux. And by 1682, he moved there permanently. He moved to the Chateau de Versailles. He invited the nobility to live there, not to give them power, but to keep them busy with ceremonies. They competed for meaningless honors like holding the shirt in the morning, while Louis XIV had real power. Louis XIV saw war as a way of building the glory of France and his own personal glory. Now, during his time, Louis XIV fought several wars. Worthy of note is the War of Devolution, which is a conflict between France and Spain over the possession of what is today known as Belgium and Luxembourg, the Spanish Netherlands. He also fought the Franco-Dutch War between 1672 and 1678. There's also the War of the League of Augsburg. There's also the War of the Spanish Succession. Now, this wars left millions dead and left France deeply in debt. To Louis XIV, he believed unity meant religious conformity, meaning everyone has to have the same religion to be united. And in 1685, he revoked the Edict of Nantes. Before the Edict of Nantes, there has been several wars, conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics. And Henry IV, he was an Huguenot, but he converted to Catholicism just in a bid to stop the wars between the religious conflicts between the Protestants and the Catholics. The Edict of Nantes signaled the end of the conflicts between the Catholics and the Protestants. Now, before the Edict of Nantes, there were different religious conflicts between the Protestants and the Catholics. And this was a recurring conflict, and the deadliest was actually the massacre at Saint Bartholomew. In a bid to restore religious peace in France, Henry IV, himself being a Protestant, thought by converting to Catholicism, he was going to bring religious peace. And that was what he did. And religious peace came to France after the edict was signed. But the peace would last until 1629, where the Peace of Arles was signed, stripping the Protestants of their political and military rights. And guess who signed the Peace of Arles? Yeah, Louis XIV's father, Louis XIII. He signed the Peace of Arles, stripping the Protestants of political and military rights. And about 60 years later, Louis XIV officially revoked the edict, bringing France back to being a Catholic state. The remaining Huguenots, the remaining Protestants, emigrated to other European countries and America. Now, because Louis XIV signed the Edict of Fontainebleau to revoke the Edict of Nantes, your guess is as good as mine. Yeah, the Protestants were in trouble. So the Protestant churches were destroyed. The Protestants were forced to convert or to flee. And around 200,000 Protestants left France. Many were skilled workers and merchants. And as a result, France's economy suffered and its rivals benefited. In his final years, Louis XIV suffered immense personal losses. One of his greatest losses was his first and eldest son, which was called Louis le Grand Dauphin. He died in 1711. His grandson and great-grandson also died shortly after. By 1715, only a 5-year-old great-grandson remained, the future Louis XV, Louis XV. Louis XIV died on September 1, 1715, aged 76, after 72 years on the throne. And while doing my research for this video, I saw one of his final words when he was dying. He said, "I have loved war too much." Louis XIV left a mixed legacy. He made France a cultural superpower, dominating Europe in art, fashion, and architecture. He built a central government that lasted over a century. It set the standard for absolute monarchy, inspiring rulers from Peter the Great to Napoleon Bonaparte. But his war drained the treasury, his persecution of Protestants weakened the economy, and his obsession with power sowed the seeds for the French Revolution just 74 years after his death.